Hi everyone, welcome to English for You. I'm Kat.
I'm Elsie.
And today we are talking about vaccines.
疫苗.
Yay! We all have heard this word and probably all of you have gotten one by now, I hope.
Like vaccines, vaccination.
Yeah, it was actually the word of the year in Merriam-Webster and Oxford dictionaries last year. So 2021's word of the year was vaccine. Yeah.
Maybe also mask.
Well, yeah, mask is also important, but vaccines are even more important.
Yes.
So, we are talking about vaccines, but we're not just talking about COVID-19 vaccines. We're talking about all kinds of vaccines because there's a lot to know about them.
So we're going to talk about like the history.
Yeah, the history, some of the science, and some of that. It's actually a really interesting story because you think about times where they didn't have vaccines. Those were scary times.
How did the people survive?
They didn't.
They didn't.
A lot of people died from diseases, a lot more people. People live a lot longer now, usually.
So maybe somebody saved all of the people.
There are some
inventing vaccines.
There are some scientists and doctors who people, think of as heroes because of what they did. So we're going to learn about some of them today and what they did and what diseases they did it for. So let's get right into it.
Reading. Vaccines, protecting us from diseases for over 200 years. Since the rise of COVID-19, there has been a lot of talk about vaccines. You might wonder how vaccines got started. That story goes back to the 18th century. Smallpox is a deadly disease that affected humans for thousands of years. In 1796, British doctor Edward Jenner made an important discovery. He noticed that people who had contracted a far less deadly disease called cowpox did not catch smallpox. Jenner scratched liquid from cowpox sores into the skin of a young boy, who then showed immunity to smallpox. In 1798, Jenner invented the first smallpox vaccine. Over the next couple of centuries, many people were given the vaccine. The world was able to get rid of smallpox by 1979. In 1885, the first vaccine for rabies was introduced. It was developed by two French scientists, Louis Pasteur and Émile Roux. Before the rabies vaccine, nearly everyone who caught rabies died. Since the 20th century, new methods have been developed for creating vaccines. This has allowed the invention of vaccines for many other diseases.
Okay, our article starts off by talking about, of course, what we've been dealing with for the past 2 years. Since the rise of COVID-19, there has been a lot of talk about vaccines.
这里呢，我们看到一个名词 rise， 没错，它在这边当的是名词用哦，代表是兴起、增强。所以自从 COVID-19 出现之后呢，一直有关于 vaccines， 也就是疫苗的讨论。那疫苗我们说是 vaccine， 那疫苗接种这个名词是 vaccination。那动词呢 ？What about the verb?
To vaccinate.
To vaccinate. 给点点点，也就是给某人接种疫苗。
Yeah, and there's also a short version, vax.
Vax.
There's also anti-vax, which means people who are against vaccines. Hopefully, none of you guys are, because they are a very good thing for us. There's a lot of science to say how good they are for us and how, they help people a lot.
Yeah, so hope all of you got
vaccinated and stay vaccinated to get your booster when you need it. So the article says, you might wonder how vaccines got started. That's a really good question. That story goes back to the 18th century, 300 years ago. So how does something get started? When something gets started, that means something begins, but it's sort of a casual way to say it. When you say, let's get started, that means let's begin doing this. Let's begin our work. Now, when we say it goes back to some time, something goes back to is used when we're talking about a date that happened a long time ago, that something happened or something started.
OK， 那我们先看看 get started 代表的是开始，那 let's get started 那就是让我们开始吧。还有就是呢，我们可以用 get something started， 像是 let's get the party started， 让我们开始这一场派对吧。那你可能纳闷，到底疫苗是怎么开始的？我们看到 go back to something 代表回到某个时间点，追溯到那个时间，所以故事追溯到18世纪。
So it goes back to the 18th century, 300 years ago, the 1700s, when there were more diseases and they were way worse. So the article says smallpox is a deadly disease that affected humans for thousands of years. Smallpox was awful. I'm so glad we don't have it. So a disease, as you might guess, is an illness. Now, it's an illness of a certain kind. It affects a person, it can affect an animal, or even plants. And it keeps their body or their mind from working normally. It's not like a cold. Like, a cold is not a disease. Like, cancer is a disease, or Alzheimer's disease, or maybe COVID-19, I think.
Or
Parkinson's, yes. Or I think COVID-19, you could call it is a disease. Yeah. The flu is also a disease. Influenza. So an example sentence, Alzheimer's disease causes people to lose their memories over time and become confused. Unfortunately, a lot of older people get this. There's no cure yet. But it's, they're working on it. So the disease we're talking about here is smallpox.
没错，我们这边在讲很多不同的 diseases， 不同的疾病。那 smallpox 是其中之一，就是天花。那我们这边说呢，它是一个 deadly disease， 会致人于死的疾病哦。
All right, so something that affects you, like a disease affects people. To affect means to act on someone or act on something and cause a change in them. Usually that change is called an effect. And then something that affects you might be something like an illness or a disease. For example, this cold is affecting my nose and throat. They feel itchy and I keep coughing. So it's affecting me in this way. It's changed my body in that way.
我们这边呢看到一个形容词子句，里面有这个 affect 动词。那形容词子句是哪一个呢？ That affected humans for thousands of years. 这个形容词子句呢，用来形容修饰先行词 disease。那里面我们刚刚说到的动词 affect， 它代表影响或是对身体的伤害侵袭。那是一个及物动词，所以你后面直接加上受词就好了。所以我们可以说 The weather affects our mood. 天气会影响我们的心情。Our mood affects our job performance or academic performance. 心情就会影响工作表现或者是课业表现。那课文这边说到的是呢，天花是个影响人类数千年的 disease.
Yeah, so smallpox was very, very deadly. It killed a lot of people. It killed a lot of children, especially. So the article says in 1796, British Dr. Edward Jenner made an important discovery.
形容词 British 代表的是英国的，所以在1796年呢，英国的医生 Edward Jenner 他有一项重要的发现 ，make a discovery， 那就是发现一件事情。我们当然也可以直接用动词 discover 来说。那如果是有重要的发现 ，make an important discovery。So what was this important discovery?
Well, it says he noticed that people who had contracted a far less deadly disease called cowpox did not catch smallpox. Interesting.
Cowpox, smallpox.
Yeah, cowpox and smallpox. So there's a lot of poxes. We still have poxes today like chickenpox, but chickenpox doesn't usually kill people. It's just itchy and then it goes away. But to contract something, especially for a disease, means to become ill with it. So you can't contract a disease that isn't contagious. Like you can't contract cancer. It has to be something you get from somebody else. So like, for example,
COVID.
COVID. You can contract a cold. You can contract the flu. You could contract smallpox back when it was a problem. So an example, Jill contracted HIV when she was young. So she has to take medicine to stay healthy.
Contract 这个动词呢，代表感染。Contract a disease 那就是感染一个疾病。So for example, we can say he contracted COVID-19 while he was traveling. 他在旅游的时候得到了 COVID. 那另外呢 ，contract 这个字还可以发音为 contract， 那代表的是名词合约。So you might need to sign a contract， 签署一份合约。那回到课文呢，我们说。A far less deadly disease 就是比较不致命的疾病，这边讲的是 cowpox， 也就是牛痘。所以这位医生发现感染牛痘的人不会得到天花。这里又有一个形容词子句出现了 ，Who had contracted a far less deadly disease called cowpox。这个形容词子句形容修饰前面的先行词 people。那再来动词 catch， 这边不是接球的动作，不是抓到，是染病。
Okay, so he noticed this fact that if you got cowpox first, you wouldn't get smallpox. That's right. So Jenner scratched liquid from cowpox sores into the skin of a young boy, who then showed immunity to smallpox. Okay.
So does that mean she put something into the young boy's skin?
He did, yeah. So if you scratch, probably he used like a needle, and if you scratch somebody, it means you make like a shallow and a narrow cut in your skin. Like cats will often scratch you. I have a scratch right here from one of my cats.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it's a long one, but of course it's not very deep. It didn't bleed because it's a very shallow cut. So to scratch, you could also say this is scratching. Like if you have an itch, you want to scratch it. So yeah, using something sharp. Probably he used a needle and he put liquid from cowpox sores in the scratch. So an example sentence for scratch. Ouch! The cat scratched my arm with her claws and now it's bleeding. Ouch! So what did he use to make the scratch? Liquid from sores.
What are sores?
Sores are painful spots on your body. Usually there's something that's infected with something. Like when you get chickenpox, you will get big red bumps all over your body. Those are sores. Or like if you wear new shoes, sometimes, you will get like big lumps on your feet that are really painful. Those are sores called blisters. Now, a sore from cowpox is filled with like infective liquid with bacteria and stuff. So he would take that and scratch it on his skin, and apparently that made him immune to smallpox.
Okay, 所以 scratch 这个动作是抓、刮或是搔的动作，哈，搔痒的搔。You might scratch your head, you might scratch your skin. 那再来我们看到的 cowpox sore 意思是牛痘的疮，就是那个感染的地方。所以 Jenner 将这个年幼的男孩呢，皮肤划破，并且滴入牛痘。
So what he did was he took the liquid from the cowpox sores, scratched it into the boy's skin. The boy couldn't get smallpox after that. He had immunity. Immunity is your body's ability to not be affected by diseases. If you have immunity to something, that means even if, like, for example, if you had immunity to COVID-19, if somebody around you had COVID-19, they cough in your face, they do something nasty, but you still don't get it because your body can fight it off. That gives you immunity, and that's what vaccines do.
没错 ，immunity 这个名词呢代表免疫，所以呢，当我们说某人 show or have immunity to something， 代表就是对那个疾病有免疫力。那它的形容词是 immune system， 就是我们的免疫系统。
And here's a fun fact: the more time you spend in nature, the better your immune system will be.
So go out and have fun.
Yeah, exactly. Play in the dirt. So, what else happened? In 1798, Jenner invented the first smallpox vaccine. All right, so Jenner invented a vaccine for smallpox, or inoculation for smallpox, which is something we'll discuss a little bit later. But to invent is a verb that means to create or produce something useful for the first time. So an inventor is a person who invents or creates something new. Like Edison was a very famous inventor. He and his team helped create light bulbs and helped electricity start working around the US and then around the world. So something you might hear from an inventor, an example sentence, I've finally done it. I've invented a machine that can travel through time. Yes!
Invent 这个动词呢，代表发明创造，所以 Jenner 这个医生在1798年的时候发明了第一个天花疫苗，所以我们可以说他是 the inventor of the vaccines. Can I say that?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Inventor 代表是发明家，所以我们也可以说 Thomas Edison is considered one of the greatest inventors in history. 爱迪生被认为是历史上最伟大的发明家之一。
And I just mentioned him. Here's the thing, though. I don't think this is actually a proper vaccine the way we think of them now. You know how we have a tube with a needle on it and you have the stuff that you put in? I think his was more like an inoculation where he just scratched it into people.
所以不是像针筒私人这样注射的。
So inoculation and vaccination are two kind of different things. So I think we're about to learn about like the modern vaccine and who invented that and how it works. So, of course, there's many different kinds of vaccines. Now we have vaccines that we didn't have 100 years ago. But anyway, the article says over the next couple of centuries, many people were given the vaccine.
所以在过去的几个世纪中呢，人们都被注射这样子的疫苗。
Yeah. The world was able to get rid of smallpox by 1979. So there is no more people with smallpox in the world. Hooray!
所以到了1979年呢，世界就正式摆脱天花这个东西了。
Yeah, except they still have samples of it in labs.
实验室还是有。Yeah, keep researching it, right?
Yes, of course, of course. So the article says, now for the next part of the vaccine development. In 1885, the first vaccine for rabies was introduced. Yeah, I remember reading about this when I was a kid. Rabies is a really terrible disease. It's a disease that is usually carried by animals like bats or raccoons, like wild animals, and they can give it to pets. So like if a pet is bitten by a rabid animal, that's an animal with rabies, they will become sick with rabies unless they have the rabies vaccine. And usually it kills them. It's really sad. It's a really terrible disease. But yeah, that's why we give our pets rabies vaccines.
Rabies 就是我们听到的狂犬病，所以呢，1885年的时候，第一个狂犬病疫苗就问世了。这边的动词呢 ，introduce， 我们以前学它是介绍，这边是采用、引进，做被动使用。
So they had to develop a vaccine for rabies. And I remember the story was there was a young boy who was bitten by a rabid dog. So the dog had rabies. The dog later died. The boy, it looked like he was going to die because if you get rabies, usually you die. So the article says, it was developed by two French scientists, Louis Pasteur and Émile Roux. So scientists, these are people who are trained in science, and their job involves doing research into things like medicine or space or new animals or solving scientific problems. So yeah, they were doing research involving medicine, involving rabies, and they were learning about how to help cure it or how to help vaccinate people against it. Now, an example could be, for scientists, Veronica wants to become a scientist and study space when she grows up.
Scientist 就是科学家啦，那科学这个学问是 science， 那还有一个形容词 scientific， 好，就是科学的，所以科学的证明、科学的证据 scientific proof。狂犬病疫苗呢是被法国的科学家所发展出来的。
So before the rabies vaccine, nearly everyone who caught rabies died.
对，就像是刚刚 Kat 说到的，在狂犬病疫苗问世之前呢，几乎所有得到 rabies 的人都会因此而死亡。
Since the 20th century, new methods have been developed for creating vaccines.
那自从20世纪开始呢，新的方法也被发展出来创造疫苗。
And we keep inventing new vaccines for new kinds of diseases. There's vaccines for HIV, HPV, COVID-19, the flu. There's a new flu vaccine every year.
Yes.
Many, many different kinds of diseases. Tuberculosis.
肺结核。
Yeah. So there's lots and lots of vaccines out there now for many different kinds of diseases. And many of these diseases you have never had because there are vaccines for them that you got when you were a kid. So, yeah, this has allowed the invention of vaccines for many other diseases.
没错，有了他们这样子的努力，让其他疾病的疫苗呢也可以被发展出来。在这边看到的 invention 名词代表发明创造。And that's why we can have COVID vaccines now.
Yeah, and thank goodness we do. And we have many different COVID vaccines. Like you think we have Moderna, Pfizer, BNT, AZ, Medigen, what else? There's a whole bunch.
Yeah, you name it.
Yeah, there's so many different COVID vaccines, so we have lots of options to stay protected. So yeah, that's the history of vaccines, and we are really happy that we had them because it means we have less disease in the world, people are able to live longer, and people don't get as many really bad diseases. So thank you for inventing vaccines, Mr. Pasteur, Mr. Jenner, and Mr. Roux. And we will see the rest of you in our For You chat.
For You chat.
All right, so our For You chat question today, I think, is a really interesting one. What kind of medical advances do you think will happen in the next 50 years?
In the next 50 years, I think they might come up with a way to cure Alzheimer's.
That would be great.
Or to prevent it.
I really hope so. I think now that we unlocked the human DNA code,
Yes.
that will help with a lot of future research.
And also a way to cure Parkinson's.
Yeah, so maybe some diseases that you would get because they are in your DNA, you won't have to get because they can change your genome.
Right, maybe it can be prevented.
That would be great. I think, it's kind of weird. I don't know if this will be the next 50 years or the next 100 years, but I think that we will have nanites, which are really, really tiny robots that they can inject into you. And they can use like a magnet or programming to target a part of your body that needs fixing, and those tiny robots can fix it, and you never have to have surgery.
Oh, that's nice.
That's what I think. So that would be really cool. Genetic DNA changes or little tiny robots that help you fix your body.
That one maybe in the next 100 years.
I guess we'll see. So we already have robots that can perform surgery. They perform surgery really, really well. So maybe we'll see that.
Da Vinci surgery?
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci, yeah.
Yeah. So that might be in the near future. What do you guys think? It's up to you. So we hope you've learned a lot about vaccines, and maybe we'll see even more interesting medicine in the near future. For English For You, I'm Kat.
I'm Elsie.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Vocabulary Review.
Disease. Mary has a disease in her brain, but her doctors think they can cure it. Effect. The strong earthquake affected the building, and it looked as if it might fall down. Contract. Tim contracted an illness while he was on vacation, but luckily he feels much better now. Scratch. Ryan scratched his arm on an old piece of metal, and it really hurt. Invent. Carl Benz invented the modern car in 1886. Scientist. Jenny's job as a scientist for our company is to find new, healthier ways to make sugar.
智慧小补帖
Smallpox. Cowpox. Rabies.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net